Captain Gantu gave Lilo and Stitch a run for their money and proved himself a formidable foe throughout the entire franchise up until his turn to the good side at the end of the series. But when you think about it, Gantu's drive as the antagonist never stemmed from him being evil. Instead, Gantu was just a misunderstood alien whose heartbreaking backstory proved that he was just dealt a bad hand in life. In fact, if he had just been shown some approval throughout his life and career, he might have joined Team Lilo and Stitch a long time ago. Captain Gantu may have been a captain of the Galactic Armada during the height of his career, but his path to get there was a long and heartbreaking one. Gantu first revealed bits of his true origin story during the first episode of Lilo and Stitch the series after he'd been forced to retire from the Galactic Armada and was living his life in shame. In the first episode, he explained that he was originally born on an icy, unnamed planet in the Kreplach system. It was there that his father left a massive impression on the young alien that would follow Gantu around for the rest of his life. You see, Gantu's father was described by him as being very authoritative, and one of the biggest lessons that he imprinted on his son was to avoid others at all costs and to never trust them. He made his son believe that he would never amount to anything, especially if there were others around to pull him down. Gantu took those lessons to heart, and throughout the Lilo and Stitch series, it was revealed that because of that mindset, Gantu didn't have many friends growing up. But the alien yearned for his father's approval, or anyone's approval for that matter, and so Gantu spent his life listening and adhering to his father's authoritarian rules no matter how much happiness it might have cost him. Now, throughout the Disney Channel show, Gantu slowly grew closer to his bunkmate, Ruben aka Experiment 625, and through their closeness, he slowly shared more and more about his tragic life. It's through these stories that Gantu mentioned what it was like growing up and being excluded. According to the recounting of his childhood, by the time he had turned 12, Gantu was excluded from the parties and events thrown by the other aliens his age, and he didn't have anyone to call his friend. And by the time 13 rolled around, he had to get braces, which only made him feel more excluded from his peers. Gantu slowly began to despise who he was more and more thanks to the way his father and those around him treated the poor teenage alien, and his need for approval only continued to grow. There was a point in Gantu's young life where he did find some semblance of happiness though, as in the series, he mentions his high school girlfriend, an alien named Cinta, who was the same age as him. However, when Gantu actually ran into Cinta as an adult in the series, she was quick to point out reasons why he was never able to fit in with the others. She cited that he had practically no style at all, and because of that, he was essentially a social reject. This only solidified the fact that Gantu had a truly depressing childhood that was filled with those around him looking down on him. But, oddly enough, it would be that very first lust for approval and authoritarian mindset that led Gantu toward the highlight of his career. Despite the fact that he was viewed as a social pariah, Gantu managed to make something of himself within the Galactic Armada, and none of that would have been possible had it not been for his drive to be better, which only stemmed from how much those around him dismissed Gantu and put him down. You see, in Lilo and Stitch the series, Gantu mentioned that he eventually got involved in sports where he excelled because of his physical prowess, which is something that he clearly had to work hard for, judging by the various shapes and sizes of the other aliens from the same species as him. And though his being healthy is obviously important, the fact that it stemmed from a fear of not being good enough is ultimately heartbreaking. After excelling at sports, Gantu decided to take his father's authoritarian mindset that was instilled in him and put it to good use by joining the impressive and ever-expanding Galactic Armada. This proved to be something else that the dismissed alien could excel at, specifically because of the fact that his father trained him to follow strict orders and to hold the law above all else. Now, the positive note that Gantu proved himself enough to join the Galactic Armada didn't come without a heavy price that left the alien with a synthesized hole in his heart. In the Disney Channel show, they revealed that he joined the Armada. He left behind his love, Cinta. Gantu was even quoted in the series as saying, "Perhaps if I married her instead of joining the Galactic Armada, my life would have turned out better," proving that he knew how sad his life had been. In fact, he even mentioned that it was his pride that got in the way of love. He needed approval, and he needed to feel like he lived up to everything his father molded him into, which was a law enforcement officer. In an attempt to earn the respect and approval of his father, Gantu used all that he was taught growing up and all of the strength that he amassed to make a name for himself and even become a captain in the Galactic Armada. There was also likely a need to follow orders that Gantu's father passed down to him that made him feel like he needed someone to tell him what to do, and there's no better place for that than the military. Captain Gantu replaced his father as the dictator in his life for the Grand Councilwoman, who really didn't treat Gantu with much more respect than he had previously received. Now, his time as captain, as glorious as it was, ended up being brought down by a single blue experiment that Disney fans have all grown to love, only adding to the disappointment in Gantu's life. During the Lilo and Stitch movie that started it all, Gantu was the one in charge of transporting Stitch, who was still known as Experiment 626 and was a prisoner of the Galactic Armada. But as you know from the movie, Stitch escaped from Gantu's ship, and though the captain was given a chance to redeem himself and capture the experiment, Stitch proved to be too cunning, and in his rage, Gantu ended up causing a lot of potential problems between the Galactic Armada and Earth. This is why at the end of the movie, Gantu was forced into retirement in a less than honorable manner, only adding to the ridicule and misery that followed the poor alien around like the plague. Gantu's life after being forced into retirement was one that he couldn't settle for, though, and sadly it led him to the employment of a truly evil and hateful hamster. The main antagonist throughout the entire TV show was always the villainous Dr. Jacques van Hämsterviel, and when he offered Gantu a job, the recently retired captain took the opportunity. But here's the thing, there's a good chance that Gantu didn't take the job because he had suddenly turned into a bad guy. Instead, it's more likely that he was lost without anyone giving him orders, and when offered the chance to work again while also possibly getting revenge on Stitch for putting Gantu in that situation in the first place, he just couldn't say no. And that's really sad, because not only would that mean his father's toxic parenting techniques were still damaging him and causing him to seek approval still, but it also meant that he was now employed by someone who was truly heinous. In Lilo and Stitch, the series, it was revealed that the vile Hämsterviel was the person who ordered Jamba to create all of the space experiments in the first place, including Stitch aka 626. And throughout the show, he would constantly berate, belittle, and talk down to Gantu for every little mistake that he made, which most likely brought him back to his home life and what it was like growing up with his father, at least on a subconscious level, which again would mean that Gantu hadn't learned to let the trauma go. Dr. Hämsterviel was yet another abusive figure that Gantu submitted to, only this time he had someone with him to help him shake his old habits. Gantu's relationship with Ruben helped the alien not only open up about his sad and tragic upbringing, but also helped him stand up against Hämsterviel and eventually redeem himself. As the series went on, there would be an episode here and there that featured Gantu catching a lucky break and deciding to stand up to Hämsterviel. For instance, there's an episode that ended with Gantu winning the lottery, at which time he immediately called up his boss and told him to shove it. Although almost every time he did turn away from Hämsterviel, he always ended up back under his thumb and subjected to the little monster's ridicule. If it hadn't been for the way his father raised him, perhaps he would have actually called it quits a lot sooner, rather than to continue to live his life thirsting for approval to make up for him being a supposed disappointment growing up. You see, Gantu was never really an evil alien. He was only ever following orders, and that was made clear during the episode of Lilo and Stitch that Amnesio appeared and wiped everyone's memories. As soon as Gantu is free from the memories of his past and who he was, he became a much nicer character. In fact, he was even saddened to see who he had become and feared going back to that point when his memories returned. That's why it felt so good at the end of the series when Gantu officially switched over to Lilo and Stitch's side. Not only was he granted his status back in the Armada, but he was also allowed to bring Ruben along with him, and it proved that he had finally dropped the metaphorical shackles that his father created during his tragic and heartbreaking childhood. While watching it in short bits, Gantu's life could have been perceived as comical, but after hearing it in one sweep, isn't it hard not to feel bad for the former captain? Make sure you let us know your thoughts in the comments below.